When it comes to Eddie Brock, Thomas Hardy, taking on the role of the titular reporter, has increased his fan following. However, old fans remember Toffler Grace playing the role of Eddie Brock in Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 3, the movie with the bully Spider-Man that we enjoy so much. Now that Eddie has such a huge fan following, we decided that it is time to delve deep into his family life and get a look at his family tree. So strap in as we investigate the life of this journalist. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin.
We are Venom.
Edward Eddie Brock did not have a great life. The villain turned anti-hero grew up with an abusive father who never cut him any slack. Eddie did great when it came to academics, but his father never gave him the recognition he truly deserved. Turning to his friends for support, Eddie was willing to go to any length required to make sure he was accepted by them. This was why he stole his father's car and decided to go out drinking with his friends. While sneaking back with the car in his inebriated haze, Eddie ended up killing his neighbor's young son, which traumatized him. He did not want to plead innocence, and his father was not happy with that. He beat Eddie black and blue, and when Eddie pleaded not guilty, the charges were eventually dropped. But in order to do that, his father ended up bankrupt, which cemented his hatred for Eddie even more. Eddie decided that the best way to move forward with his life would be by using any means necessary, and what led him to fabricating a story about an internship and joining ESU's journalism program. He met Anne Weying there, and they got entangled pretty soon. They even married and moved to New York City together. Here, Eddie started working as a journalist at the Daily Journal, and even though he was doing a great job there, he never got the recognition that he deserved in his father's eyes. So, in a way, to satiate that need for approval and validation, Eddie was always searching for a big break. His biggest break came in the form of a letter by Emil Gregg, who claimed to be the serial killer known as the Sin Eater. Eddie did an interview with him and wanted to keep the identity of the serial killer a secret, but the pressure from the police and the editor led to him exposing the identity as Emil Gregg. However, on the same day, Peter Parker found the actual Sin Eater, who was a detective, and Emil was just the detective's neighbor. This led to Eddie losing his job, and his wife left him when Eddie refused to accept his fault. His father disowned him, and everything was because of Spider-Man from where Eddie was standing. Because of all of these things, Eddie went from a journalist to a tabloid writer, and he hated every minute of it. Turning that hatred as fuel for physical workouts, Eddie reached the perfect body, but in his mind, he had one goal, which was to make Spider-Man pay. That is why, when he finally got together with the Venom symbiote, Eddie's instinctive reaction was to go after Peter. However, as we know, this villain soon reformed his ways and became one of the best anti-heroes that the Marvel Universe has ever seen, and we could not be happier. Carl Brock. Father. Carl Brock is Eddie's father, and while Carl may not accept it himself, he is the reason why Eddie is the way he is. Carl was a man for whom emotions were a foreign concept until he met the love of his life, Jamie. They fell in love, and they were so happy together. Jamie desperately wanted a family with Carl, and who was Carl to deny her anything she wanted? So they decided to have a baby. However, during childbirth, there were a lot of complications that led to the untimely death of Jamie. Carl was taken back by this death, and somewhere he blamed Eddie for it. He became very cold and emotionless father towards Eddie, and he never showed up for his son. He never gave Eddie the encouragement he deserved, even though his son was doing great academically. But the strained relationship between the father-son duo got worse when, as a teen, Eddie accidentally killed their neighbor's son. Carl spent the majority of his money trying to cover up the issue after he abused Eddie into pleading not guilty. This incident led to a lot of resentment growing in Carl's heart towards Eddie. This peaked when Eddie was fired from his job, owing to his scoop on Sin Eater. Carl disowned Eddie, and even though he was somewhat kind towards Dylan, his grandson, he never showed that kindness towards Eddie. Carl denied his responsibilities when it came to shaping Eddie into the man he was, which led to the symbiotes taking Carl and abandoning him in the desert to keep him away from Eddie and Dylan. Jamie Brock, mother. There is not much known about Eddie's mother, Jamie. However, whatever we do, know is this: Jamie was a very sweet young girl, and when she met Carl Brock, she fell in love with him. She was the first person to make Carl feel any emotions, which made Jamie very important in Carl's life. They got married and decided to start a family together because this is what Jamie wanted the most. The pregnancy went as most pregnancies do, but during childbirth, there was a lot of complications. Even though the doctors tried their best, Jamie did not survive, leaving an emotionless Carl in charge of the newly born Eddie, whom he felt nothing towards. As fans, we have speculated that if Jamie had not died, Eddie would have had a better relationship with his father, making him a far more well-adjusted human than he is. Anne Weying, wife. Anne Weying was the law student that Eddie harmed when they met at ESU. Their relationship was passionate and fiery, and soon enough, they married, with her finishing her degree and Eddie working as a journalist at the Daily Journal. Their life was going great until it was not. When the Sin Eater debacle happens, Eddie loses his job. Anne tried her best to make Eddie take accountability for his actions, but Eddie had no interest in that. Because of that reason, Anne separated from him. However, this was not a goodbye for them, as Anne and Eddie ran into each other again. When Spider-Man and Venom were about to have their showdown in an amusement park, Anne decided to take Eddie out of his vendetta. Now, obviously, seeing Eddie as Venom traumatized her to a certain degree, but this trauma got the best of her when Venom joined her. Basically, at one point, Sin Eater attacked her, and Anne was bleeding internally. Eddie decided to take Anne away and urged her to bond with the Venom symbiote as it would be able to heal her. However, she did not want to do that, as in her eyes, Venom turned Eddie into a monster. To keep her calm, Eddie asked Venom to bond with both of them, but that did not help her at all. So Venom had to separate from Eddie completely and bind with Anne. This led to Anne waking up as a she-Venom. The first thing that she did when she woke up was kill a bunch of thugs who had incapacitated Eddie and wanted to rape her. The brutality of the massacre affected her when Venom separated from her. At first, she was traumatized, thinking this was all Venom's work, but when Eddie explained that the Venom could not make someone do something they did not want to do, Anne assumed that she herself was a monster. Every time Venom bonded with her, even though it was to save her, the explosiveness of her emotions under Venom's influence shocked Anne completely, which led to her eventually deciding to part ways with Eddie completely. Once she parted ways, she found out that she was pregnant and gave birth to Dylan. She was not doing so great mentally and gave Dylan to Carl, Eddie's father, for safekeeping. However, once Dylan was out of the picture, Anne's mental health tanked even further. She ended up agoraphobic tendencies and stopped going out of her house because she was always scared with the Venom symbiote would show up and attach itself to her permanently. Eddie showed up at her doorstep with no memory of the hatred he had for Spider-Man. He wanted to rekindle their relationship, and even though Anne's offhandedly mentioned that she had not left the house for days, Eddie did not realize the severity of it. He opened one of the windows of her apartment, and the first thing that Anne saw when she looked out was Spider-Man. Spider-Man was in his black costume because his red and blue one was stolen, and seeing that, Anne panicked, thinking it was a Venom symbiote coming to get her. Eddie was immediately angered and wanted to take revenge on Spider-Man, so he transformed into Venom in front of Anne and went after the hero, leaving Anne in a rather fragile state of mind. Driven mad with her anxiety, Anne jumped out of the window of her apartment, ending her life in issue 19 of Amazing Spider-Man Volume 2. Dylan Brock, son. When Anne was bonded with the Venom symbiote, somehow she ended up pregnant. The child born out of that pregnancy is Dylan. When he was born, Anne was not in a good state of mind, so she decided not to keep him around. She sent Dylan away to live with Carl, promising to get him back when she felt better. However, soon after that, she killed herself, leaving Dylan with his grandfather for the upcoming years. Now, Carl never told Dylan about his father. Carl had disowned Eddie after Eddie lost his job, and so Dylan knew that Carl was his father. He was very shocked when he learned about his elder brother, Eddie. Dylan also suffered at the hands of Carl the same way that Eddie had been abused whenever he tried to express himself. He went to Eddie, hoping the older older brother would join hands with him and kill Carl with him because Dylan could no longer take the physical abuse. Eddie kept Dylan with him for a while and eventually learned that Dylan was his son. That is, when we learn the true reason why Dylan exists. Dylan was created by the symbiotes to weaken the god Null so that the symbiotes could finally be free of the god's control. When the time came, Dylan showed up and did his job, which led to the symbiotes being freed from the hive mind. Eddie even erased Dylan's darkness, but it made it hard for Dylan to adjust to normal civilian life. When he was fatally shot trying to stop a mugging, Dylan bonded with Venom, and with Eddie's well wishes and encouragement, Dylan took on the role of the new Venom. Marvelous verdict. The villain turned anti-hero did not have an easy life, and surprisingly, neither did any of his family members. The Brock family is a very good example of how emotionally negligent and abusive parents can affect a child and how hard it is to be an adult and break out of that toxic cycle. Eddie Brock changed himself and broke the cycle that Carl started with him, and that makes him a better father than Carl ever was, which really shows that Eddie could have been a wonderful young man had he got the support that he truly deserved. When it comes to Anne, it's truly sad how her life turned out, and definitely if Eddie had been a different man, she would not have been pushed as far as she was. So, in a way, Carl's irresponsibility affected not just Eddie, but Anne too. And this truly shows how widespread the effect of an abuse can truly be, even though it may not be as obvious when you first see it happen. The abuse ends and the healing starts, where the generational abuse breaker and Eddie did a mighty fine job at getting out of that. And if you like our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks, everyone.